Howdy folks, it's me, Josh. Take a look at this. This is a video of a Chilean military parade. That's right, Chilean. But as you can probably tell, there's something a little bit Prussian about this picture. And this isn't the only thing in South America with some German influence in it. But how on earth did this happen? How did Germans manage to influence someplace halfway across the world without establishing a single German colony? And what if Germany did colonize South America? German interest in South America extends much further back than the creation of the modern German state. Centuries back. In the mid-1500s, both the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, along with its vast colonial holdings in the Americas, were under the control of the powerful House of Habsburg. The emperor, Charles V, was in debt to the Welser family, a rich German banking family. And so, in 1528, in order to pay off his debts, he gave the Welsers control over some land in northern South America, a land which, due to the stilted houses the natives had built there, they called Little Venice, or Venezuela. The Welsers ruled over Venezuela for about 18 years, until, in 1546, Charles revoked their contract, giving the land back to Spain. But tales of the Welsers' colonial project, as well as their expeditions to find El Dorado, would fuel future German colonization efforts, as well as German intrigue in South America. Fast forward a couple centuries to the 19th century. Turmoil in Spain during the Napoleonic Wars ultimately led to the collapse of the Spanish Empire in the continental Americas, as the Latin American Wars of Independence led to the creation of numerous new states in the region. And, in Germany, the introduction of liberalism and nationalism would lead many Germans to push for the creation of a united German nation-state, of which colonies were seen as essential to. And so, many Germans became interested in establishing a new German colony in South America, particularly in the largely unoccupied and strategically important region of Patagonia. Meanwhile, in 1838, some guy named Bernhard Eunem Philippi, a Prussian naturalist and explorer, decided to move to Chile, where he then had a brilliant idea. What if we sent a bunch of Germans to Patagonia and made Patagonia German? Dude, you're a genius! Bernhard then proposed his brilliant idea to the Chilean government in 1842, proposing that Chile use a bunch of German settlers to colonize Patagonia for them, but they were less enthusiastic and said no. 2 years later, he tried again, and they said no, again, at which point Bernhard just said, "Screw it, I'll do it myself." He hired a Prussian merchant, whose money he used to buy a bunch of land, which he then began to flood with more Prussians. The Chilean government, though, noticing that there was a considerable amount of sauerkraut in southern Chile, then began to worry that if they didn't give Bernhard's project the okay, the Prussians might just come down and occupy Patagonia for themselves with the support of all the Prussians Bernhard had just brought over. So, figuring it would be better if Patagonia was flooded with Chilean Germans than German Germans, they said, okay, fine, we'll let you bring your Germans here, just make sure they're Catholic, and please don't bring the Prussian military with you. Over the next few years, Chile saw a boom in immigration from Germany, particularly after the German revolutions of 1848, which saw many Germans flee the country. However, Bernhard ended up bringing over too many Protestants. So, the Chilean government punished him by sending him to the very southern tip of Chile, where he was then killed by natives in 1852. The Germans that settled in Chile, though, would retain a very strong German identity, but despite the hopes of Germany, and the fears of the United States, the Germans there didn't really act as an extension of the German state, instead just being German Chileans. But that wouldn't stop German interests in setting up a colony in Patagonia. In 1859, Prussia sent a fleet of ships over to Taiwan in an attempt to claim the island for themselves, but for some reason, they ended up sending one of the ships to the literal opposite side of the world for the sole purpose of investigating the possibility of setting up a colony in Patagonia. However, largely due to the fact that they were sent halfway across the world from China, the crew was way too tired and the ship too damaged, so they just went home. A couple years later, though, in 1862, Otto von Bismarck would end up becoming the minister-president of Prussia, with the country coming under his control. Bismarck was opposed to the idea of Prussia, and later Germany, setting up colonies around the world, seeing it as too much of a burden and upsetting the other colonial powers' interests, potentially making Prussia a target. After the unification of Germany, though, many colonial societies were pissed that Bismarck wasn't setting up any colonies, so in order to quell their anger, he decided to set up a couple colonies in Africa. But even then, he didn't want them, as he even attempted to sell them to Italy on one occasion. After Bismarck was forced to resign in 1890, though, the country came under the control of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was much more enthusiastic about colonization than Bismarck. But by this point, Patagonia had been completely swallowed up by Chile and Argentina, with no room left for German colonization. Even though Germany wasn't able to colonize Patagonia for themselves, they did the next best thing, with many immigrants moving to Argentina and Chile, with Chile coming under heavy German influence up through World War I, hence the Prussian-style military. And following World War II, many Nazis in Germany would end up fleeing to Argentina due to just how large of a German population there was. Even up to the present day, immigration in and out of Chile has remained an issue. But with this, as well as many other issues in our modern world, it's hard to get clear information with bias clouding our media landscape. That's why I use Ground News. Ground News combines thousands of different news sources in order to get a clear picture of the story they're trying to present and avoid the political bias that these sources often carry. Take for instance this story about a migrant crisis at the Chilean-Peruvian border, with Peru not allowing Venezuelan migrants to pass through their country. As you can see, the amount of coverage varies from different points of view, as does the way they present it in their headline. But thanks to Ground News, I can now clearly see where these sources are coming from, how factual they are, as well as their political leanings, in order to get a more nuanced picture of the story at hand. I find Ground News to be extremely useful in helping to give me an informed look into the news. And if you want to try this out for yourself, you can subscribe through my link at ground.news/Josh for a special offer of 30% off their Vantage plan, giving you access to all features for as little as $5 per month, so you can get a clear view of the world around us and help to support my content. And now, back to the video. Despite Bernhard's program of bringing Germans over to Patagonia to settle the region, Prussia never found itself in the position to colonize it. And by the time Bismarck was removed from power, it was too late, with Germany never being able to realize their dream of a South American colony. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, Prussia had managed to successfully colonize Patagonia? So, in order to make this work, there's a couple things we're going to need to change. First, Chile never gives Bernhard the green light to settle southern Chile, so he just keeps doing it on his own terms, not expressly tied to either the Chilean or Prussian governments. And not having been sent away, he isn't killed either. Then, once Prussia sends their expedition to Patagonia, they instead send a ship that, wasn't a battered crew sent all the way from China, meeting up with Bernhard, where they then make agreements for a Prussian occupation. Then, in the year 1861, after the outbreak of the American Civil War, which would keep the US occupied, and before Bismarck comes into power and stops it, Prussia would land troops in Patagonia, occupying the territory and setting up a colony with Bernhard as its first governor. Okay, Prussia has successfully colonized Patagonia. So, now what? First of all, this occupation would immediately set off alarm bells in every power it affects. For Chile and Argentina, Prussian occupation of Patagonia is a direct threat to their national security, and for Britain, this would threaten their position in the Pacific. But the one country that would be the most aggravated by this occupation would be America. Before the construction of the Panama Canal, in order to get ships from one coast to the other, the US would have to send them all the way around South America. And if Prussia took complete control over Patagonia and the Strait of Magellan, they would be able to completely cut the US Navy off, severing the two coasts from each other. However, due to the ongoing American Civil War, there wasn't really anything that America could do at the moment. But perhaps, in an attempt to weaken the United States and keep them from intervening in Patagonia, Prussia might lend some level of support to the Confederacy, potentially sending officers to help train Confederate troops, similarly to what von Steuben did in the American Revolution. However, due to the Union blockade on the South, it wouldn't be enough to save them, as Prussian support would find it difficult to land. So the Union would still come out on top, though perhaps a couple of years later. After the war, the US would immediately demand Prussian withdrawal from Patagonia, threatening force if they didn't comply, similarly to US actions against France due to their occupation of Mexico. The US would send warships to Prussian ports in Patagonia and threaten war, but due to the damages of the war, there probably wasn't really much they could really do at this point. But Bismarck, not wanting the colony anyway, would probably just sell it to the US, much to the dismay of the local population, as well as many in Germany. Feeling betrayed by Bismarck and under occupation by America, the Germans in Patagonia would begin to seek independence, ultimately resulting in a revolt breaking out. Still not fully recovered from the Civil War, the US would find itself in a costly war in Patagonia, attempting to put down the insurgency. But with just how important the region was to the US, that likely wouldn't have mattered, with the US doing everything it could to maintain control over the region, not letting it fall into the hands of a hostile power. In the end, the US would end up defeating the insurgents, bringing the region back under American occupation. A few decades later, after Bismarck's departure, Kaiser Wilhelm II would likely make efforts to spark unrest in Patagonia, encouraging the local German population to revolt against the American occupiers, promising reunification with their mother country as a colony. However, seeing the conflict looming between Germany and the United States, and its potential to spiral into a major conflict, Britain makes attempts to mediate the dispute, ultimately allowing for Patagonian independence on the condition that neither Germany nor America keep troops there and allowing free passage through the straits. Both sides would agree, but this wouldn't be enough to stop the German-American animosity. By the time of the outbreak of the First World War, Germany would likely move to occupy Patagonia with support from the Patagonian populace and government in order to support their colonies in the Pacific as well as to screw with Entente shipping lines. Seeing this occupation, the US would quickly join the war, entering much sooner than in our timeline, making landings into Patagonia, managing to drive the Germans out, securing control before sending their troops over to fight in Europe. With the US fighting in Europe much sooner than in our timeline, the Entente manages to secure a quick victory over Germany, with the war likely ending sometime in mid to late 1915 and not seeing nearly the amount of destruction that it did in our timeline. And with the war ending before the introduction of the 14 points, the peace ends up looking remarkably different. France would re-annex Alsace-Lorraine, Russia would annex Austria and Galicia, as well as East Prussia and the Polish portions of Germany, and without the war taking as heavy of a toll on Europe, the Kaiser manages to stay in power in Germany, though with his power reduced by the Reichstag. In Russia, with this victory, support for the Tsardom would be bolstered, potentially averting a Russian revolution. Italy would gain their desired lands in the Adriatic without self-determination getting in the way, and Serbia would still create Yugoslavia. Austria-Hungary would remain intact on paper, but would likely collapse not far into the future. And with the Central Powers not seeing nearly as much success as they did in our timeline, the Ottoman Empire likely doesn't join, potentially surviving a few years into the future before eventually collapsing, with the much less exhausted Entente likely holding on to more territory. And Germany would still be stripped of its colonies, with Patagonia being put under American occupation. Back in America, without the immense war debts tying European economies to the United States, the Great Depression, if it happens at all, wouldn't drag the rest of the world down as well. And so, as a result, without the widespread destruction from the war, and without a worldwide Great Depression, socialism and fascism never end up gaining prominence throughout Europe, with Europe likely returning to relative stability, not shifting too far from the pre-war status quo. As the US takes control over both entry points from the Atlantic to Pacific Ocean, it finds itself growing in its position in the Pacific, bringing it into direct conflict with Japan, whose conquests threaten that position. And so, as the US continues to seek domination over the Pacific, it once again finds itself on the verge of war. So, thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, make sure to stick around for more. And hey, you can also maybe subscribe or something. So, that's it for today's video. Well, till next time, see ya.